My name is Amy Gibson. I was raised in a small Kansas town, the sort of place where everyone knows not only your name, but your secrets too. My life was far from extraordinary. It was a simple, predictable routine. I worked at the local library, surrounded by dusty books and the quiet pulse of small-town life. My days were spent cataloging volumes, helping children with school projects, and sharing friendly conversation with the occasional visitor who lingered over a cup of coffee in the reading nook. I appreciated the simplicity of that existence. I was practical, self-reliant, and decidedly skeptical. Growing up, I witnessed my mother cling to her faith as if it were the very lifeline that held her together. After my father left us, she would sit by the window with her Bible, murmuring prayers into the emptiness. I, on the other hand, believed only in tangible things, things you could touch, fix, or hold. God, to me, was nothing of the sort. That skepticism carried me through my teenage years and well into adulthood. I learned to depend on myself for even the smallest of tasks. When a pipe burst, I grabbed the wrench. If the lights flickered, I climbed the ladder to replace the bulb. It wasn't about pride, it was simply survival. Relying on others had always led to disappointment. That night was no exception. It was late, and the bulb on the porch had burned out. I sighed, fetched a replacement, and headed for my toolbox. The cool evening air wrapped around me as I set up the ladder beneath the porch light, a task I had done many times before. I ascended the steps with familiar ease, the metal creaking softly under my weight, until I reached the top and extended my arm to unscrew the burnt-out bulb. Then, in a split second, a subtle imbalance occurred, a nearly imperceptible wobble that quickly turned into something far more ominous. My foot slipped. The world tilted in a dizzying motion. I remember the fall in broken fragments, like scenes from a slow-motion film, the harsh clang of the ladder hitting the ground, the rush of air whipping past me, and the sickening crack as I hit the wooden porch floor. Then came an all-consuming pain, a jolt so intense it raced through every fiber of my body. But the worst part wasn't the pain at all. It was the eerie silence that followed, a stillness that swallowed me whole. I can't recall much of the moments immediately after, only that later I was told my neighbor Jim had heard the crash from his backyard. He found me sprawled on the porch, unresponsive, my body unnervingly still, and he urgently dialed 911. At the hospital, doctors worked frantically to save me. Machines beeped, orders were shouted, and hands moved with desperate precision. There I lay, a body on a sterile table, but I wasn't really there anymore. It's hard to explain the sensation of watching yourself from the outside. I found myself observing a lifeless figure on the hospital bed, surrounded by a flurry of medical activity. Yet I wasn't in pain. I wasn't feeling much at all. Instead, there was an odd detachment, as if I were floating in a dream. That's when I realized I wasn't alive, not in the way I'd always understood life to be. And yet, I wasn't completely gone. I existed in some in-between state, a liminal space that defied all explanation. Before we continue this incredible journey together, I'd like to invite you to join our growing community. Hit the like button and subscribe to this channel for more stories that inspire and touch the soul. And here's something special. Leave a comment below with your name and city. In the next video, we'll share a personalized message with some of you, and your name might just be mentioned in front of thousands of viewers. Imagine that, your own moment to shine and be part of something truly special. Let's keep this connection alive. The moment I realized I wasn't in my body anymore, panic surged through me. I tried to scream, but no sound emerged. I attempted to move, but there was nothing to move. No weight, no substance. Yet I was still me. I hovered above the hospital bed, watching as doctors and nurses worked with frantic urgency. One of them pressed a finger to my wrist and shook their head, while another checked the monitors. Then, in a strained yet authoritative voice, someone announced, "Time of death, 11:47 p.m., you're dead." One would think that realization should have been terrifying, but it wasn't, not in the way I expected. There was no immediate fear, no agony. Instead, there was a profound silence, an eerie, all-encompassing stillness that felt like drifting in the deepest parts of the ocean, weightless and untethered. And then, as if on cue, the hospital room began to blur, and everything shifted. The sounds of the machines and the frantic voices slowly faded away until I felt completely detached. It was as if some unseen force had yanked me out of the physical world and deposited me somewhere entirely different. There was darkness, an all-consuming void, not the gentle darkness you experience when you close your eyes, but a deep, endless and utterly empty chasm. I was in a state where I could neither see, feel, nor hear, existing in a paradox where I was both nowhere and everywhere at once. And then a sound emerged. At first it was merely a soft whisper, faint and distant. Yet gradually it grew louder, echoing like voices bouncing off the walls of an immense canyon. These voices overlapped, each one uttering words that I couldn't fully grasp. They all spoke about me. She never believed. She rejected the truth. She thought she knew everything. Their words struck like knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. A dreadful sensation crawled over me, a feeling beyond fear, an overwhelming awareness that I had lost all control, that whatever was unfolding was far greater than anything I could fight or understand. And then I began to fall. It wasn't a fall through the air with a rush of wind. It was a sickening, relentless pull, a downward spiral into an unseen abyss. The voices persisted, echoing ceaselessly in the void. My mind screamed for the descent to end, but I had no voice, no power. Then there was a sudden shift, a change in the air, in the space around me, and a light appeared. At first, it was just a tiny pinprick in the distance, barely noticeable against the oppressive darkness. But as I fell, the light grew brighter, expanding and radiating an energy I had never experienced before. It wasn't merely light, it was a living presence. Gradually, the voices faded away, and the fear began to dissipate. For the first time since leaving my body, I felt something genuine, warmth. The light wasn't just ahead of me, it was drawing me in, enveloping me, filling every part of my being. I no longer felt the sensation of falling. Instead, I found myself moving steadily toward the light, pulled by a force stronger than gravity, more certain than anything I had ever known. And then I saw him. I couldn't quite process what I was witnessing. The light wasn't simply a glow or a distant radiance. It pulsed with an indescribable energy, vibrant and alive. Within it, a figure began to materialize. At first, all I perceived was a shadowy silhouette, but as it drew closer, the details became clearer. He wasn't just an abstract presence. He was a person, dressed entirely in white. His robe flowed as if it were spun from the very essence of light itself. His face, both familiar and entirely unique, held no trace of harshness or judgment, only a profound depth, as if he could see into every hidden corner of my soul, every thought, every wound, every secret I had ever tried to hide. I longed to speak, to ask where I was, to demand answers, but the words simply would not come. Then he moved even closer, and the warmth of his presence cascaded over me in gentle waves. It wasn't just an external warmth. I felt it seep into every part of my being, dissolving all my fear and doubt. All my life I had built impenetrable walls around myself, convinced that letting my guard down was a sign of weakness. Yet in that moment, those walls crumbled, and I found myself falling to my knees. Or at least that's how it felt. I wasn't even sure I had a physical form in this place, but one truth shone through with absolute clarity. I was in the presence of Jesus. I had heard his name in passing and seen it emblazoned on church signs, but I'd never truly believed in his reality. And now, here he was, more real than anything I'd ever known. His voice wasn't just sound, it resonated deep within me like a melody that could be felt without being heard. "Amy," he said. That single word was more than just my name. It was a calling, a reminder that he had known me long before I existed. My soul trembled at that sound, and tears welled in my eyes. I had spent so much of my life clinging to the belief that I was in control, that I didn't need anyone. Yet, standing before him, I realized how small I truly was, and how little I had ever understood. I tried to speak, but all that emerged was a fragile whisper. "Am I dead?" His expression remained unchanged. There was no sadness, no pity, only a love so vast and overwhelming it nearly swept me away. "You were," he simply replied. I was rendered speechless. I had always thought death marked the end, the final curtain. But this wasn't an ending. It felt like the beginning of something entirely new. Before I could ask any further questions, the space around us shifted. The darkness that had once enveloped me vanished, replaced by a realm I struggled to describe, a place not like any on earth. It was vast and endless, filled with hues I had never seen before, colors brighter, richer, and more alive than anything earthly. The very air vibrated with an energy that transcended sound and sight. I looked down and gasped. Through a window into another world, I saw Earth, the hospital where doctors still worked over my lifeless body, my neighbor Jim pacing the corridors in worry, and my mother, still awake, clutching an old photograph of me from when I was a child. She hadn't been told yet. Then, as if the window widened, I saw them, the faces of people I had hurt, those I had ignored. I witnessed moments when I had chosen anger over kindness and rejection over love, laid bare without any excuses or justifications. It was as though I was watching my entire life under the unforgiving lens of truth. I turned to Jesus, my chest tightening, silently asking, "Why are you showing me this?" He didn't need to answer. I already knew. I had spent my life believing I knew it all. Yet here, in the presence of raw truth, I recognized how blind I had been. And then he revealed something else, something that made my soul tremble. The space around us shifted once more, and this time, it wasn't just fragments of earth I saw. It was something far greater. Before me stretched an endless expanse filled with radiant light and warmth, a realm that pulsed with the very breath of creation. It wasn't just a place, it was a presence, a domain where time held no sway as it did on earth. I could feel the immense weight of eternity pressing in, yet instead of fear, I was filled with awe. And then I saw them, figures bathed in brilliant, shimmering light, more vivid and real than anything I'd ever encountered. They weren't merely standing, they were immersed in worship, their adoration filling that eternal space with a beauty and grace that resonated deep within me. But this wasn't like the church services I'd caught a glimpse of on TV or noticed as I passed by. This was entirely different. Every facet of that place embodied worship. Every gesture, every sound, every presence there vibrated with a love so immense it made my knees tremble. It was then that I realized I stood at the very threshold of heaven. I turned to Jesus, my voice barely escaping as a whisper. "Am I meant to be here?" I managed to ask. He didn't reply immediately. Instead, he extended his hand. And the moment I took it, everything changed. Revelations flooded into me, visions, not mere memories, but profound truths I had spent my entire life avoiding. I saw my life from a higher perspective, witnessing the moments when I had turned away from love, allowed fear to control my choices, and rejected him without ever truly understanding what I was denying. I saw that every wound, every scar, every bit of bitterness I carried wasn't his doing, but stemmed from my refusal to let him in. Tears streamed down my face. I had spent so long trying to control everything, convinced that I was strong enough on my own. Yet standing before the very source of all life, I realized how desperately I had been searching for something without even knowing it. Then the vision shifted once more, and suddenly I saw people, so many people. Some were strangers, others looked familiar. They wandered, lost and searching for something just as I had once done. And then I saw myself among them. My heart pounded with the weight of this revelation. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Jesus looked at me, and even before he spoke, I felt his message resonate within me. "There is more for you to do." That understanding settled over me like a warm mantle. This wasn't an ending, never had it been. In that instant, I sensed something pulling me back, tugging at the very fabric of my being. The brilliant light began to fade. The presence of heaven grew dimmer. My heart ached at the thought of leaving, yet I knew I wasn't meant to stay. Not yet. Before everything vanished, before I was drawn away from that sacred place, Jesus spoke once more. His voice wasn't merely sound, it was a promise. "Tell them." And then, the light was gone. I was falling again, not the terrifying, empty descent I'd experienced before, but a fall that felt different this time. I knew where I was headed. I gasped as my lungs burned and my body ached. Around me, a cacophony of sounds rushed in. The beeping of machines, hurried voices, the weight of the world settling back onto me. I was back. I was alive. Before we continue, I invite you to join something special. Leave a comment below with your name and the city you're watching from. In our next video, we'll be giving personal shout-outs to some of you. Your name might be mentioned in front of thousands. Imagine having your own moment to shine as part of our amazing community. And if this story touches your heart, please like the video. Your support helps us share these powerful messages with the world. Then, the first sensation that struck me was pain. A deep, searing agony that shot through every inch of my body like fire coursing through my veins. My chest pounded painfully with every breath, my limbs felt as heavy as lead, and my head throbbed as if struck by lightning. The harsh, almost blinding hospital lights above made my vision blur. Frantic shapes moved around me while urgent, disbelieving, and emotional voices filled the room. "She's back!" A collective gasp filled the air as a nurse burst from the room, urgently calling for the doctors. Soon, more voices joined in. the sound of hurried footsteps echoing against the linoleum and machines beeping in a frenzied symphony. My body trembled as oxygen was forced into my lungs. I had been dead, yet now I was alive. Memories crashed over me like a tidal wave. The darkness, the disembodied voices, that endless, harrowing fall, and the crushing loneliness. And then came the light, warm, inviting, filled with the unmistakable presence of Jesus. His words reverberated in my mind, encircling my soul with an unbreakable bond. "Tell them." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice stolen by the enormity of what I had just experienced. I was no longer the same person who had climbed that ladder just hours before. Something deep inside me had irrevocably shifted, a transformation I could not yet fully comprehend. The doctor entered, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Amy, can you hear me?" he asked. I blinked and nodded weakly. "You were gone for 8 minutes," he said slowly, as if voicing it made the reality more tangible. "No pulse, no brain activity. We lost you. 8 minutes." Those 8 minutes felt like an eternity. I glanced at my hands, pale and trembling. I could still sense the remnants of something beyond this world, a whisper of a reality far more vivid than anything I had ever known. Surprisingly, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, fear had abandoned me. Yet, how could I possibly explain this? How could I look someone in the eye and confess that I had stood in the presence of Jesus Christ, that I had seen heaven, that I had been shown the truth about everything I once rejected? Would they believe me, or dismiss it as mere hallucination, the final trick of a dying brain? I thought of my mother, who had clung to her faith even when life had crushed her spirit. Would she see this as undeniable proof of everything she'd always believed? Or would she assume I was simply confused, rattled by trauma? I had no answers, only the stark realization that I could not ignore what had happened, nor could I revert to the person I was before. I had been given a second chance, and now I had to decide how to use it. The days that followed blurred into a haze of medical tests, whispered conversations, and looks of incredulity. I overheard doctors discussing my case in hushed tones just outside my hospital room. 8 minutes without oxygen, and she woke up as if nothing had happened. One murmured, "It doesn't make sense. There should be brain damage, memory loss, something." But I was fine. More than fine. I was changed. I sat in that hospital bed, staring at the stark white ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. The engulfing darkness, the terrifying void, and then the light. The presence of Jesus, his voice, his love, and that overwhelming truth that shattered every wall I had ever built. And those final words, "Tell them," I understood what he meant. He wanted me to share what I had seen, to declare to the world that he was real, that heaven existed, that eternity was tangible. But how could I do that? Would anyone listen? The few people I tried to confide in, the doctors, the nurses, just smiled politely, nodding as if I had awakened from a bad dream. "It's probably just your brain trying to process everything," one said gently. I wanted to scream, "No, you don't understand. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't some random hallucination. It was real." Yet I remained silent. Doubt crept in. Perhaps they were right. Then, in that charged moment, she returned. "She's back!" someone gasped. A nurse hurried out, calling for the doctors once again. More voices, the pounding of footsteps on linoleum, and machines beeping in a disordered symphony surrounded me. My body shuddered as oxygen rushed back into my lungs. I had been dead, and now I was alive. Memories crashed in, a tidal wave of darkness, disembodied voices, that endless fall and unbearable loneliness, followed by the light, the warmth, the presence of Jesus. His words still echoed within me, binding my soul with an unbreakable thread. "Tell them." I tried to speak again, but my throat was raw, my voice barely a whisper, robbed of its strength by the journey I had just endured. I was not the same person who had climbed that ladder mere hours ago. Inside, something had shifted irreversibly, a transformation beyond my current understanding. The doctor returned, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. "Amy, can you hear me?" he asked. I blinked and nodded weakly. "You were gone for 8 minutes, he repeated slowly, as though uttering it made the surreal fact more real. No pulse, no brain activity. "We lost you. 8 minutes. Those 8 minutes felt like an eternity. I looked down at my hands, pale, trembling, and I could still feel the echoes of another realm, a whisper of a reality far more vivid than any I had known. I felt no fear. For the first time, fear had abandoned me. Yet how could I possibly explain this? How could I face people and tell them I had stood in the presence of Jesus Christ, seen heaven, and been shown the truth about everything I had once denied? Would they believe me or dismiss it as the hallucination of a dying mind, a mere trick of my subconscious? I thought of my mother, who had clung to her faith even when life had broken her. Would she see this as proof of all she had always believed, or assume I was confused, shaken by trauma? I had no answers, only the undeniable truth that I could never ignore what had happened, nor return to my old self. I had been granted a second chance, and now it was up to me to decide what to do with it. The days that followed were a blur, a mix of medical tests, hushed conversations, and incredulous stares. I heard doctors murmur outside my room. 8 minutes without oxygen, and she woke up as if nothing happened. It doesn't make sense. There should be brain damage, memory loss, something. But I was fine. More than fine. I was different. I sat in that hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling, replaying it all in my mind. The darkness, that terrifying void, and then the light. The overwhelming presence of Jesus, His voice, His love, and that crushing truth that had pierced every barrier I had built. His final words, "Tell them," resonated within me. He wanted me to share what I had witnessed, to tell the world that He was real, that heaven existed, that eternity was within reach. But how could I do that? Would anyone listen? The few people I tried to speak to, the doctors, the nurses, only offered polite smiles and nods, as if I had woken from a nightmare. "It's just your brain trying to process everything," one whispered softly. I wanted to scream, "No, you don't understand. This wasn't a dream, a random hallucination. It was real." Yet I held my silence. Doubt began to creep in. Maybe they were right. And then, as if on cue, I heard it all over again. A voice. "She's back!" Someone gasped. A nurse rushed out, calling for the doctors. Voices erupted, footsteps pounded on the linoleum, and the machines beeped in a disordered symphony once more. My body trembled as oxygen was forced into my lungs. I had been dead, but now I was alive. Memories cascaded back, darkness, disembodied voices, that ceaseless fall, and an unbearable loneliness. Then, again, the light, the warmth, the presence of Jesus. His words still echoed within me, an unbreakable bond around my soul. "Tell them." I attempted to speak, but my throat was raw, my voice barely a whisper, worn out by the profound journey I had returned from. I was not the same person who had climbed that ladder just hours ago. Inside, something irreversibly shifted, a transformation I could barely understand. The doctor reappeared, his face etched with awe and disbelief. "Amy, can you hear me?" he asked. I blinked and nodded feebly. "You were gone for 8 minutes," he repeated slowly, the words hanging in the air. No pulse, no brain activity. "We lost you. 8 minutes." It felt like an eternity. I gazed at my trembling, pale hands, still aware of the lingering presence of something beyond this world, a hint of a reality more vivid than any I had known. I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt no fear. Yet how could I explain this? How could I look anyone in the eye and say I had been in the presence of Jesus Christ, that I had seen heaven, that I had been shown the truth behind everything I had once denied? Would they believe me or dismiss it as the hallucinations of a dying mind? I thought of my mother, who had clung to her faith even when life had shattered her. Would she see this as the proof she had always believed in, or think I was merely confused, traumatized? I didn't have the answers, only the stark realization that I couldn't ignore what had happened, nor return to who I once was. I had been given a second chance, and now I had to decide what to do with it. The days that followed became a blur of tests, whispered conversations, and looks of disbelief. I overheard doctors discussing my case in hushed tones outside my room. 8 minutes without oxygen, and she wakes up as if nothing happened. It doesn't make sense. There should be brain damage, memory loss, something. But I was fine. More than fine. I was transformed. Lying in that hospital bed, staring at the white ceiling, I replayed it all in my mind. The darkness, that endless void, and then the light, the presence of Jesus, His voice, His love, and that overwhelming truth that shattered every barrier I had ever built. His final command, "Tell them," echoed deep within me. He wanted me to share what I had seen, to tell the world that He was real, that heaven existed, that eternity was tangible. But how could I? Would they listen? The few people I attempted to tell, the doctors, the nurses, only smiled politely, nodding as if I had awoken from a bad dream. "It's probably just your brain processing everything," one murmured softly. I wanted to scream, "No, you don't understand. This wasn't a dream, a hallucination. It was real." Yet I remained silent. Doubt crept in. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps my mind had invented it as a shield against the terror of death. Maybe it wasn't what I had believed it to be. And then the nurse entered. She was older, gentle, and carried a quiet wisdom in her eyes. She checked my vitals, adjusted my blankets, and before leaving, she paused. "I don't know what you saw, honey," she said softly, "but I want you to know sometimes people come back changed for a reason." In that moment, all my doubts dissolved. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't imagining things. Jesus had sent me back with a purpose, yet understanding that and accepting it were two very different matters. Because if I were to speak the truth, if I stood up and declared what had happened, I knew the cost it would bring. My friends would think I had lost my mind. The people who had always seen me as strong, independent, and logical would laugh. They might say I'd been brainwashed or that I had let fear take control. But the truth was, for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I was free, and I had a choice. I could act as if nothing had happened. I could return to my old life, bury the memory deep, and move on, as if I had never caught a glimpse of eternity. Or I could do what he asked of me, tell them. I wasn't sure where to begin. I didn't know if I had the courage to face the world with this truth. But deep inside, one thing was clear. My life would never, ever be the same again. Before we move on to the final part of this incredible journey, I want to invite you to be part of something bigger. We don't do this for money, we do it because we love it. These stories need to be told. If you believe in what we're sharing, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. It might seem like a small gesture, but it means more than you know. It's how we keep this community growing and how we reach others who need to hear these messages. So if you feel connected to this, join us. Be part of our community. We're in this together. The day I was discharged from the hospital, the world felt transformed. The sun shone brightly, the air was crisp, yet nothing around me appeared the same. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I stepped outside and took my first breath of fresh air since waking up. It should have been liberating, but instead I felt the heavy weight of a responsibility I hadn't chosen. Tell them, Jesus. Those words echoed in my soul. I had spent my entire life avoiding faith, pushing away anything that required belief beyond what I could see, touch, or control. And yet, after everything I had experienced, there was no denying it. He was real. Heaven was real. Everything I thought I understood about life and death had been shattered in an instant, and now I faced a choice. I walked down the hospital steps, gripping the bag that held my discharge papers. I should have felt relief, but instead, an internal battle raged within me. If I told the truth, I knew what would follow. People would talk, they would whisper behind my back, shake their heads, and call me delusional. But I couldn't keep it hidden. I had seen eternity. I had stood in the presence of the one who created me, and I had been sent back for a reason. I thought of my mother, who had spent years praying for me, steadfast in her belief. I used to dismiss her unwavering faith as nothing more than naive, wishful thinking. I had seen her endure pain and struggle, yet she never let go of her trust in God. Now I understood why I had spent so much of my life running, from pain, from rejection, from the vulnerability of needing someone. I believed that my independence was my strength, but in truth, it had become my prison. I had built walls so high that even God himself had to break through them to reach me. And he did, not with force or condemnation, but with overwhelming love. I recalled that place, the profound warmth and the peace beyond understanding, and I realized I longed for that again, not just for myself, but for everyone. I pulled out my phone and stared at its blank screen as my heart pounded. Was I really going to do this? I took a deep breath and began to type. I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't sure what the future held. But one thing was clear. I couldn't remain silent. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. This is just the beginning. What I have to share next is even more powerful, and I don't want you to miss it. Click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now. It's going to reveal something life-changing for you. And before you go, let's do something together. If this story has touched your heart, if you believe in what we're sharing here, please hit the like button and type Amen in the comments. Let's keep this blessing going. God is working in your life, and this is only the start. See you in the next video.